Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. We are the Technology Based Addiction Group, specifically studying internet gaming disorder. Noah Mann, myself, Cara Smelter, Jessica Tilson, and Marcus Walton are the group that will be discussing IGD with you today.
So what is internet gaming addiction? Internet gaming disorder was officially included as a clinical mental health diagnosis in 2013 when it was added to the DSM-5. So what is the internet gaming disorder and what is it not? First, internet gaming disorder is a gaming addiction that causes significant impairment or distress in an individual's life. That can look like preoccupation with gaming, withdrawal from symptoms, even giving up activities that you usually do to game instead, or using gaming to relieve negative emotions such as guilt or hopelessness. With that in mind, what is it not? Internet gaming disorder is not related to internet use, and it is not related to online gambling or the use of social media or your smartphone. With that foundation in mind, we're going to move into the next slide that will give some deeper nuances to what internet gaming disorder can look like. When an individual plays games such to the point that they are no longer in control of their behavior or their daily routine, that can be internet gaming disorder, or it can be looking like predicting only spending time playing games. So like knowing when you're going to play the game and when you're not, and basing your schedule around that. It can also look like an individual using video games to fill needs, which they do not or cannot fulfill in other ways, which is what we kind of talked about before with hopelessness. Individuals with internet gaming disorder are characterized by poor coping strategies and development adaptation issues. Now that we have some understanding of what internet gaming disorder is, we can answer a few questions about who it's affecting. It occurs across all ages, from young adults to adulthood. It is also found across social statuses for socioeconomic reasons. When you're assessing internet gaming disorder, though, there's some nuances when you look at it through a global lens. First, it can be found globally, but there's a lot of nuance within that. So for different countries, you might see different levels of usage, but that can be attributed to several factors, not necessarily the disorder itself. And while we were going through the research, something that we realized was that there's a lot of contributing factors to that the research hasn't fully panned out yet. So while predominantly, particularly Asian adolescent males are found to be diagnosed with internet gaming disorder, that is for several different reasons, and further research is going to be needed to help identify and clarify some of those issues.
IGD is a new diagnosis, according to the DSM-5. It requires further studies and cases that can make the disorder a clinical disorder and more clearly identify an accurate number of incidents across populations. Studies in different parts of the world use different theories and standards to measure IGD, and thus it's been difficult to estimate global prevalence of the disorder. According to a 2020 rapid scoping review of over 5,000 citations reviewing GD, IGD, severe GD, and severe IGD in people of all ages across geographic landscapes. Of the 160 studies of various designs, used 35 different methods to diagnose IGD. The prevalence of IGD ranged for up to almost 60% in the general population, and then between 3.2 and 91% in clinical populations.
So prevention for IGD is still relatively new, and we're seeing a lot of new things essentially being tested or being tried. There are clinical preventions that have been done. One of the major things being done right now within schools and different systems is preventative education on IGD by promoting healthy management of game use. So not encouraging kids to stay away from technology or never to use any form of video game, but to use it in a healthy way and to be able to manage that. One prominent note and something that's really important is what China passed recently in the year of 2021. And they passed legislation that severely limits the video game usage of individuals under 18 years old. So this limits them to only being able to play on public holidays, as well as Friday through Sunday from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., And this is a major shift from their previous legislation, which only allowed children to play for 90 minutes on weekdays and 3 hours on weekends, but it wasn't really enforced. So this legislation is still new. We don't know how or if it's being enforced, but that is a preventative method that will be important to follow and understand and see how it relates to the high prevalence of IGD amongst Asiatic males. The assessment is also something that is still new. And as we conducted our research, the thing that most of us felt was that really researchers and clinicians are still trying to figure it out. So there's a lot of different assessments and screening methods being tried, and there's different support amongst each one. Some are specific to certain countries and some are questionnaires and different tests. The important thing about most of the instruments is that they involve self-response, which makes it interesting and identifying.
As Noah mentioned, there hasn't been a standardized assessment tool that's been really agreed upon as like the predominant or main tool that's used by people, by therapists to do their assessments. But the closest thing that we have is the IGD-9 SF. These measures are taken in a study that I looked at over a 12-month period, and if people scored high on 5 or more of these factors, they were judged to have internet gaming disorder. So this is the closest thing to a standard tool in the field, but as Noah said, that's still an ongoing and developing part.
So treatment for internet gaming disorder was something that we found to be consistently inconsistent. With that, we found that there were a few things that were mentioned pretty regularly, and that was pharmacological treatment, reduction of gaming time treatment, and preventative methods. With that, there were not necessarily a standardized treatment that was presented to be overall effective across different spheres and contexts. But with that, Marcus, would you like to share about what you found?
Yeah, one study that I thought was really interesting, it used as its control group a group of patients that did a course of CBT treatment over time. And then the experimental group did this Pipitech course. It's basically, as it says here, an eclectic kind of holistic approach that does incorporate some CBT interventions, but also a long course of intra and interpersonal work in group therapy contexts and family therapy as well. And so it's holistic scale, I think, really trying to reach out and to address every area in some ways of functionality and relationships in the participants' lives, and like even trying to, I think, reach into co-occurring disorders as well. Really set it apart from the CBT. But Jessica, you're going to say more about the CBT. Again, through all the studies that we've read, CBT is the predominant intervention in theory that is used, but it's been shown to have some pretty limited, effects. And that was one last thing, Jessica. And in the PPTech course, there was really great gains shown by those who did the sort of more holistic approach as opposed to the purely CBT approach.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Marcus. With that, the whole point of using CBT, well, the thought process behind it is that you can address some maladaptive thoughts and try to change those for different clients. But like Marcus said, it's been shown to be very inconsistent. And something that I think is in the root of that is that there isn't a specific thought process that's being targeted. Internet gaming disorder is something that is relatively new, and we are still learning. And so future studies and research might show CBT becoming more consistent in that, but right now it truly is at the beginning stages. Another theoretical approach that was coming up in the literature was the family systems approach. It's shown to be applicable to treating adolescents with internet gaming disorder, but with that, there's a few nuances. When you're treating adolescents, you are not treating them by themselves in many cases, especially with internet gaming disorder, because you have to include their parents. Their parents have access to the money that buys the games and the video game systems and all of that. It's not just the adolescent themselves. The parent might also have a say in how often they play or what they play. And so there's a lot going on there that is affecting the whole system of the family, and that looks different in different situations. So one thing that I would point out with that is the goal of a treatment plan for an adolescent with internet gaming disorder has to fit within the system and the values of that family unit. Whatever that looks like for them, it has to fit within that. And that's not necessarily the same across the board. So that's one nuance to mention. But what was really cool that I got to experience was I got to attend a Computer Gaming Addicts Anonymous meeting. It was just a really interesting and fun experience, honestly. So Computer Gaming Addicts Anonymous was established in 2014, so right after internet gaming disorder was included in the DSM. And so the purpose of that fellowship is to support each other and recover from problems resulting in excessive gameplay. And so when I personally attended the meeting, it was super enlightening. It was almost essentially the exact same as the AA meeting I attended, except for that it was online. The flow of the meeting was the same. It was discussion based, but also a lot of the conversation was very similar. The only thing I would note was that there was a lot of discussion around withdrawal symptoms, and I didn't necessarily experience that in any other meetings I attended this semester. And so with that, it was a very encouraging meeting, and it seemed to be it functioned just like any of the other meetings. There was a consistent group that came and supported one another. With that, we do have a video that we are gonna play that gives some insight into what it can look like to be in one of those meetings.
I just would spend hours and hours completing tasks and trying to level up and trying to be the best that I could possibly be in there. And I really felt like this sense that if I could be the best at this thing that I was inside of, that there was something inside of me that would be filled up, that I would be like, I'd be on the Mumble meeting and I'd be in the middle of the game, you know, completing tasks for the day that I knew I still had to complete. And I'd be talking to you all saying like, hey, like, I'm still playing the game. Like, I can't get out of it. I don't know what to do. And you guys just said, keep coming back, you know, keep coming to meetings, keep talking to people. You know, people would give me their number, and that's what I did. And eventually I got to the point where I was like, hey, I need to get out of this, you know, guild. Can somebody who has had experience in a guild please help me in getting out of it? And you all gave me some really good advice about, you know, you told me about, you know, these real life relationships that are being neglected for these, you know, online ones. And you talked about, you know, that you told me that you did it, right? That you logged off, that you were able to get out of this game, that you're able to leave the guild, and that, you know, your life didn't end, that the world didn't end, that it was okay afterwards, you know, that there weren't all these people that were mad at you. And so I said, all right, well, if other people have been here and they've done it, maybe I can too. That's how far sucked into it that I was.
IGD is a co-occurring disorder. ADHD, or attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, as well as autism, are known to co-occur with internet addiction. IGD as a co-occurring disorder with ADHD and autism impacts all populations. While children with ADHD and IDD are more heavily studied, adult studies are still emerging. However, those that are emerging are demonstrating a direct correlation between ADHD and IGD, and specifically ADHD in childhood with the emergence of IGD in adulthood. And finally, individuals with autistic traits and hyperactivity in attention symptoms were significantly associated with the severity in which they experience IGD. So in a sample study, they particularly demonstrated higher levels of impulsivity and hostility.
So there, as we've mentioned, and has been a frequent theme of everything that we've presented, is that there are major research gaps when it comes to IGD. This is because of how new it is and because of how inconsistent some of the research methods have been. So some of the major things that we've identified is the need for a more consistent treatment method. There needs to be longitudinal studies. There haven't been very much follow-up. So if CBT is effective as a treatment, how does that look for those individuals 5 years later or 10 years later? These are questions that we don't yet have answers to. We're also needing to look into more IGD in older adults. There hasn't been very huge sample sizes. We need more diversity and dimensionality. There's also been a lack of clarity between internet addiction and internet gaming disorder. And then there's also this question of what is causing the drop off from adolescence to adulthood. There is studies and research showing that's most prevalent amongst adolescents, but adolescents eventually become adults. So what is causing that drop off? What is causing that switch? And most importantly, we really just need a model for best practice in treating IGD.